Hello, my name is Peter John Hunt, and today I'm going to show you how to create custom WP-CLI commands. Let's hop in. All right, so you can see I've got my sample site here that we've been using for a couple of the different tutorials. I've also got a couple links here that I highly recommend checking out. One is just the documentation for all of the WP-CLI commands that are already available. As well as the commands cookbook just kind of gives documentation on how to create commands. I would say there's a decent amount of different ways that you can go about creating a command. And so I'm going to show you today kind of my default, what I've just kind of settled into is being convenient and easy. But there's a bunch of different variations. Maybe the main downside is because there's a decent amount of variations, it can be a little overwhelming or confusing on where to start. But check these out in addition to what I'll show you today. Let's hop in. So a little distinction with WP-CLI commands, kind of like NPM packages. WP-CLI commands can be installed either at a global level or a local site level. And so what that means is, like, a lot of the commands here are all global commands that can be run on any WordPress install. And they're globally available on your system. What we're going to be working on today is actually more of a local command. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll create custom commands that are specific to specific sites, maybe around like an import or environment changing options, and as you pull down an environment. And so those commands tend to be pretty isolated down to the site that they're a part of. So I'm going to show you that everything that we'll do here applies to the global level, and it's really just adding a composer file to make it a global installed package. And so I'll show you a couple examples of that, but we'll mostly kind of stay on the local level today. So let's jump into our theme here. Again, you could do this in a plugin or some MU plugin or wherever. I'm just going to do it in the theme for simplicity, but the concepts still all apply across the board. So let's just jump into our functions file. What I'll actually do here is I'll just go ahead and copy in a little include here. So basically what we want to do is we actually want to just have a separate file for our WP-CLI command to live, just kind of keeps it organized. We really only wanted to include that file when WP-CLI is running. So when WP-CLI runs, it defines this global constant and sets it to true. So we can wrap this include so it only even gets included when WP-CLI instances run. So let's just save that. We'll go ahead and create a new folder here called includes, and a new file called WP-CLI commands.php. All right, so there's a couple different ways you can go about WP-CLI commands. The way I like to do it is through their class structure. So we'll just go ahead and start by creating a class here. This will kind of just be the wrapper for either our individual function or maybe multiple functions. And what we can do here is we can tie this class to WP-CLI, the WP-CLI engine. Again, we're only pulling this file in when WP-CLI is running. So we already know that WP-CLI will be available to us when this file gets included. So what we can do here is we could just go ahead and do the WP-CLI Add Command, and this is basically registering our class as a command for WP-CLI. So I'll just call this custom in the same way that there's DB or post or user or plugin. This will just be kind of our command prefix, and then we'll tie it to our class here. So very much like actions and filters in WordPress, we've got kind of what we're naming it here technically, and then what we're attaching it to here. And so this acts as the prefix. So we're going to do WP custom, whatever our function name or whatever our specific script is. So let's go ahead and just start that here. We'll call this test. Just for good simplicity, we'll do a quick success message, test complete, and go ahead and save that. Now, what we should be able to do now is really, this technically will all work at this point. So it's a registered with WP-CLI, and we've got a sub function called test. So we should be able to run WP custom test and see that success output there. And there we have it. Yep. So we're using just WP-CLI's API and some of its utility functions to do some stuff like output the success message with the terminal styled text here. There's a bunch of other functions. You'll kind of see some of those as we go through here. But one thing about WP-CLI, so the way it works is it uses doc blocks and comments around the functions to both be the documentation for the function as well as kind of just a simple validation. So let's go ahead and just add a quick little doc block here, and this first thing here is just going to be kind of the description of our function here. So we're just going to call this test CLI, and then maybe what we'll do is we'll give some examples, and we'll say WP custom test. So this is kind of how our function is run, and then really what this allows us to do, function still runs, but now we can do WP custom help, or what we'll see is a subcommand here with the description, etc. Then all the kind of the global WP-CLI options there. You could also do WP custom test -- help at this point and just kind of get the documentation then just for this specific function. So it's going to kind of use a lot of the different sections here. They're pretty specific in how they need to be defined so that they get pulled in as the examples, etc. But it's kind of a nice way to both create documentation as well as create some validation as you go. So let's go ahead and one other thing we could do, say our function here was called test import, but we actually want our command to be test-import, which would be invalid in our function name here. We could actually go ahead and define specifically what the subcommand should be called if it's going to be different than our function name. So we'll go ahead and do subcommand, and we'll just do test. Or in this case, we could do test import. So this will kind of change our CLI command here to be test import underneath custom. So let's just try that real quick. WP custom test import, and there it goes. So again, a lot of this is optional, but it's kind of just nice things to know and things that I've used in the real world. So let's jump down to the next section. So in addition to kind of the base stuff here, a lot of what we're going to want to do is pass in actual arguments into our CLI. So for example, if we were to change this now to just be import, let's just change the command here to be import. I'll change this to say import, and we'll do import CSV. Probably the next logical thing that we're going to want is to actually be able to pass in arguments like a CSV name, for example. Let's just make sure this works here. That we're still good. Yep, we are. And so what we can do here is we can start defining options in the doc blocks here, and this will do kind of some of that validation that I talked about. And so what we'll go ahead and first add is just kind of our main argument that we're expecting here. So we'll do file name and then a little description of what our file is expecting here. So we'll do name of the file to import. So these are going to be used again, even just the carets here, the left and right carets are going to be used as kind of a pseudo validation for this. So for example, if we do WP custom import -- help now, what we're going to see is a little bit more clear about, okay, what's the usage of this command and what's the description of those options. And then similarly, if we just tried to run this now without passing in an argument, it's actually going to give us an invalid response with a message of how it's intended to be used. So let's just go ahead and do custom import test.csv. And then pass the validation, ran the script here. So that's kind of from a documentation standpoint how we can define some of our options. The way those actually get passed into our function is by default there's going to be two arguments here. There's just going to be args, and then there's going to be associated args. Main difference here is these are like required arguments, expected arguments, like a post ID, or in this case, a CSV name. Associated args are going to be things like -- help that are kind of optional. Maybe they have a default, but they're optional parameters. So really what we could go ahead and kind of start doing now is we could do something like list. I like to use the list function here to pull stuff out of an array. So the args, because you might have more than one, this is always going to be an array. This is always going to be an array. So we could just go ahead and pull these out with, but they're going to be in the order. So first index, or index 0 of this array, is going to be that file name. So what we could do here is just extract that first element of the array into our file name variable. And then maybe what we do is something like if not file exists, file name, then WP-CLI error missing file name, something like that. So kind of our own little validation to actually ensure that that file not only was passed in, but actually exists in our local system here. But maybe before we do that, let's just change this here to be imported file name, assuming that we successfully completed this. Let's just, before we even put this check, since I don't actually have a file yet for this, let's just run this once more and make sure that we're actually getting that variable. And there you can see what we passed in was test.csv, got output in our little success message here. So go ahead and re-enable this check, we'll rerun it. You'll see, nope, we've got an error. We don't have that file yet. So let's just go ahead and add a quick file here. We'll call it test.csv just for simplicity. And we'll just put some dummy data in here. And let's just check this again to see that it does in fact exist. So this conditional logic here passed, that our file does exist, and so we could kind of start doing stuff here with our file. So let's go ahead. One of the things WP-CLI has is a bunch of these utility functions like success and error. A couple of the other ones that it has that I use a lot of times is one for CSV iterating as well as for output. So let me just show you an example of those. First might be for iterating through a CSV. So similarly, this is a WP-CLI built-in utility to read a CSV based off of a file name, turn it into an array of rows that we can actually just loop over here. So let's just go ahead and do rows, and then we'll do as row. And maybe what we'll put inside here is we'll just do a WP-CLI log of the first name. So what's kind of nice about this is it sets it up so that the keys of each row are the header of the CSV. So for every row in this, it's going to attach, John to first name, Smith to last name, john.smith@mailinator to email. And it's going to do that for each of the rows here, which is just kind of convenient to be able to access that data quickly and not have to do some of those repetitive steps. Let's just run this, see if we get any errors. And yeah, there you can see we output each of the first names. We could do last name, etc. So part of what's nice about this is, you have access to the entire WordPress application within your environment. So that means you've got access to your activated plugins, your activated theme, and you can use all of WordPress's default functions. So a lot of times what I'll be doing is stuff like, okay, get the first name, get the last name, create a user, generate a password, or create a post and attribute the author to that post, import an image, etc. Right? And I know there's stuff like WP all import, but I found this extremely useful for especially some enterprise sites that have a decent amount of data mutation that needs to happen when you're kind of coming from an old site and they've got the data in some sort of an export, CSV, XML, something like that. But it needs to change, right? The fields on the new site, the content on the new site is a little different. It's parsed a little different. And so it's extremely efficient for me to be able to quickly build an import script that's unique to their CSV, unique to their data that we need to import and post types or whatever that is, as well as be able to use all of the default WordPress functions that I'm already very familiar with using on a daily basis. But the next thing might be kind of just associated arguments. So maybe what we want to do here is, as we go through each row, we actually want to do something like kind of output the kind of like a table of end results. So Wp-CLI again has some utilities here to format some output. So for example here, it's got format items, and we can pass in an array of items. With that, we can actually pass in the format type we want. So maybe something like, we want this in the table format. We're going to have 3 items. It'll be, we'll actually just pass in rows for right now for simplicity. And then the headers that we want in our table are going to be ID, actually first name, last name, and email. So what this will do is this will just actually output all of this data into a terminal formatted table. So let's just go ahead and try this now. You can see kind of just a nice table. Now, normally we probably want to just output the whole CSV, right? We'd want to do something like create a user and get the ID, and then put that in an array and pass that array into format, so we can see, hey, when I imported these users, what were their user IDs imported as, for example. Or maybe something we would do is something like adding an updated flag. So maybe we'd have a new section here called is updated or is new, and then we could mark that as yes or no or something like that. So we could, as we're running these scripts, we can see a quick report of how it ran, what ran, etc. So what we might do with that, let me think if I can put together a quick example. Maybe we do something like name equals last name, first name, space. So we'll just kind of concatenate the names. We'll start a empty array here for results. And in each of these rows, we'll just do results, and we'll do name. Oops. We'll just do results equals array. Inside this, we'll do name equals name. Maybe we'll do ID equals 1, 2, 3. What we can do then, pass that in instead of our rows, and then define again the sections in our table that we're going to want need to be consistent with some sections in this array of arrays. So if we wanted the name and ID, or maybe we wanted to put ID before name like that, then we can just try this again here. So there we've got our concatenated name. Right now we've actually done some transmutation to this data, or we imported it and then we wanted to mark it as, hey, it was updated. And we do, yeah, something like that. Pass this in. Let's call that updated. Try that again. And there we have it, right? This format function takes multiple types of formats, which makes it really versatile. For example, maybe you want it in a table because you just want to view the output. Maybe you want it in a CSV because you want to pipe it into a CSV. Maybe you're doing, instead of an import, you're actually doing an export. And so you're getting all your metadata from a post, getting all the posts, and you actually want to just output that either into a table or into a CSV. This can be really kind of flexible for that. So you could put CSV here, then run this, and you're going to similarly see now it's in an actual CSV format. But what I'll actually do is I want it to default to table, but this is a great example of where maybe the associated args comes in to be able to pass in a different format. So maybe you have your default of table, but you want to also allow people to pass in JSON, CSV, etc. So what we can do here is we can do something like this. Say, hey, we're going to get our format. If our format is not defined or is null, then we're going to just default it to table, and we'll actually just pass format in instead of hard-coded string here. Then we can add some documentation just to let users know that this is an option available to us. So for example, this might look something like, see if I can get this formatted here. Might look something like this, where we define, okay, there's a format flag that can be passed in with a format. Here's a description of what that does. The default is table, and here's our options. And this will kind of, again, serve the dual purpose of, we could do WP custom import help and see that in the documentation to say, hey, look, this has this additional optional argument, and here's kind of some of the details around that argument, which is helpful, as well as if we were to actually try to do WP custom import test.csv format equals, and then do some random thing, it's actually going to do validation to say, hey, that's not in our options here, and it was passed as invalid. So what we could do now is actually just pass in CSV as a flag and get that output as CSV, versus if we just do with no flag, it's going to default back to that table. So that's, I mean, really that in a nutshell is an entire WP-CLI command, and then you've got access to anything that you would want to do. Like I said, if you wanted to use default WordPress stuff to do something like get posts, we do maybe post type, type equals post, and then output something like this. You could loop through those, generate your list of results based off of getting fields or getting post meta or getting the ID or authors or whatever, and then format that out. So this can be used obviously for a lot more than just importing and exporting, but it's importing and exporting is especially a turnkey way that I've used it in a lot of different sites. That's just extremely effective, especially for stuff that needs to be imported over and over. Somebody passes a CSV file via FTP and once a month or something like that, and obviously you could get into using a cron job or some type of automation for that, but this is kind of a nice way to create reusable automations. So the only thing I'll add to that, so here's an example of my WP-CLI publish command that I've talked about before. It's just kind of a really small command that is what updates the style.css and changelog within a site when we're ready to push a new tag. And all I really want to highlight here is just you can add a composer.json to this and put it up in your GitHub, and then anybody could actually install this as a command from GitHub. So you'll see I've got some documentation on how to install it, but if you have it on your GitHub and you've got the composer.json and then just a command in a very similar format to what we already talked about, right? Attaching what's the prefix of your command, what's the class of your command, what are the different sub functions and documentation of your command, plus the composer.json allows really you put it out there for anybody else to use. Or in our case, what we tend to do is we've got multiple developers, and so the shareability of some of these commands is extremely useful. So check that out. I'll include that in the blog post and in the comments of this video, and let me know what you guys think, and if you guys already use WP-CLI, what you've used it for. If you've got commands that you reuse throughout the site, I'm always interested to see what other people are doing, and excited to kind of keep digging more into WP-CLI stuff. I've used it a bit, but it's fun to continue learning about more of the utilities and just ways that it can be effective. So thanks for checking out this video, and check out some of my other videos on YouTube or on my blog. And I'd love feedback. I'd love to hear how people are using the content of these videos, feedback on the style of the videos, or even just the topics, etc. So thanks, and I'll see you guys soon.